as Shakespeare put it, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Mr. Zeppo would like to add a hostile invasion by any other name is just as unacceptable.
We interrupt your regularly scheduled brainwashing in order to bring you news. Breaking news. A special segment of the almost daily ZenCast, focused on curious, quirky, and quixotic news items that you may have missed during the last 48-hour news cycle. Hosted by me, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo.
Hello and namaste, dear friends and audience. Forgive my recent micro hiatus. I got quite derailed and did not feel it appropriate to proceed with the themes and mini project ideas that I had in mind the last couple of days, given the existential crisis that was clearly developing on the other side of the planet over the last several days. Where to begin? Should I open with my darkest and most sarcastic thought about all of this? I suppose so, as I don't really have anything in mind. This show, dear friends, comes at you real, raw, and radically unscripted from the deepy, thinky, thoughty depths of my, of the inner workings of my darkest corners of my mind. And no one is handing me, no one, I swear to you, on a stack of whatever your favorite thing would be for me to swear on, no one is handing me a script with someone else's words on it to read to you. So, in the last several days, but also in the last, several weeks, in all of this slow, incremental buildup, one of my thoughts that keeps reverberating in that dark, bitter, sarcastic corner of my mind that's already, exhausted, fed up, and done with observing the chaotic, self-destructive tendencies of this, the dominant species on this planet. It keeps circling back to, because there's been a lot of saber rattling, there's been a lot of hoopla, there's been a lot of clutching of pearls, there's been a lot of dismissive, sardonic commentary, minimizing whatever eminent events were seemingly on the horizon. There's been a lot of hyping it up, perhaps a bit obnoxiously. It's been a cacophony. Let's put it that way. It's been a cacophony of a clusterfuck of all kinds of things. And as I tend to notice, watching the trends of response coming from different quadrants of the good old fashioned American social media public discourse, the backlash and counterlash and pushback and counter pushback has already been dizzying. And as of up until very recently, not a whole heck of a lot is actually really definitively had been set yet, right? Nothing had really, no definitive threshold had been violated. But for some time now, My mind has been going to this really dark, sarcastic place of sort of following up whatever thing I'm contemplating with a deep breath and the transitional statement with a sort of comical hint, as if I were the stage manager or the narrator of the world. And now I'm sort of second guessing myself if this is exactly what I've been thinking, but you'll get the gist. And meanwhile, in Yemen and various other countries, and that's not very, that doesn't say very much, but of course, if those who know, like those who understand why I would be saying that in the face of everything that's been building up in recent hours, days, and weeks and months towards this headline front page military crisis that we are now TikToking our days through. Put a pin in it. Yemen and meanwhile in Yemen and various other countries, in quotes, on a slip of imaginary paper, as if you had written it down, quoting me, and you pluck a nice, imagine it however you want, whatever shape, design, contour that makes the most sense. I'm personally, visually a fan of the old school oversized circular dot push pin. It's just a dangerously sharp needle and a big fat glob of plastic. I generally don't own those though, which is really weird. I have the traditional thumbtack shape, with the sort of weird, almost bell-shaped body and the much sturdier but shorter pin that's not quite as freakishly, like instantly bloodlettingly sharp. So those are the two main ones that I use in my mind, in my imagination, when I put things on the corkboard. We'll have to come back full circle and do a whole episode entitled "Meanwhile in Yemen and Various Other Countries." But suffice it to say, I am quite disgruntled, dear humanity, and my heart is quite ripped apart at the decades worth of inhumanity, injustice, and insanity involved. But that's not what I got on the air to talk about today. As I'm sure you're aware, and if you're not, no judgment. Don't project it into my voice because it's not happening. I'm not judging anyone who may be tuning into this and didn't realize this is going on, because that's allowed. It happens. But for some time now, and to hear some, of the Western world's analysts that have varying degrees of confident opinions of their assessment on the situation and the individuals involved. This has been a long time coming. This slow, almost slow motion build towards what in recent memory has to be fairly described as the third Russian incursion into a supposedly sovereign nation in recent living history. Never mind the stuff that came before all that. I mean, obviously, that's all included. It's all part and parcel of the whole phenomena. It's certainly reached a threshold that has got me wondering if some of the speculative fear-mongering may not actually play out. But I digress. For some time, I was going to recap what's been going on for anybody who may or may not be aware. For anybody who may not be aware, because if you're already aware, then you don't want the recap. But really quickly, and then we'll take a quick music break, and then we'll get into some deep thinky thoughts. For some time now, the Russian Federation has been amassing troops under the guise of joint military exercises with Belarus, and has literally, if not figuratively, surrounded Ukraine. Now, memories are short, and it's surprising to me how quickly things are forgotten. But Crimea was illegally annexed by the president of the Russian Federation. All right, that's not what they're called anymore. We just call them Russia now. And the Russian Federation is from the Olympics. I apologize. That's my brain not having the strongest vocabulary recall system. This, up until recently, incremental approach to try to chip away at former Soviet Empire nations, for lack of a better term, countries that are now sovereign unto themselves, but were once either completely consumed by or subservient to Mother Russia. Now, some people may be feeling pretty blasedly, nonchalantly, who gives a fuck about it, as is evidenced already quite vocally by many of the talking bobbleheads on the right. But I assure you, dear friends, that today's events are quite historic. In as much as that history books 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years from now will be contending with the events that led up to the crossing of the threshold that has been crossed today. And unlike I said in the opening little blurb, by any other name, the movements and actions taken unilaterally and without, to the best of my understanding, without consultation and without regard to Ukraine's sovereignty, these actions by President Putin don't jive and or make sense in terms of the surface narrative that I, to the best of my understand to be, the public facing explanation for what's developing, coming from Moscow, not only in the immediate term but also historically. And people should. Let me just stop right here. Dear friends and listeners in this audience, without any judgment, if you haven't had the chance to, because of whatever reasons, by the time you're listening to this episode, please do try, if you can, and by all means, pause this episode and run off and do this little exercise if you've got the time and the patience and bandwidth in your brain. I realize plenty of people may be tuning into this in the midst of whatever else they might be going through in their lives. But if you got a hot second, try and look up the UN General Assembly meeting that was called, I believe, on an emergency level, on behalf of Ukraine, and tune into the Secretary General's speech and the Foreign Minister of Ukraine, the Ukrainian Foreign Minister's speech. Worth taking a listen to, as I think at some point they may be, referenced and quoted in terms of the historic nature of the events that may unfold over the next several days and weeks and months. To that end, there was a third thing. What was the third thing? Or a second thing? Well, there's been a lot of speech making lately. And history, history can often have a funny way with speeches and quotes and whatnot. But I say that because one of the things I'm deeply concerned about is the obvious attempt to create a sort of muddied waters, double barrel echo chamber of what the fuck around the maneuvers that are currently sort of slow boiling towards whatever denouement is going to crescendo here in the coming hours and or days. And a lot of analysis has already gone into motive and motivation, if you can separate those two different things, and strategery and potential plans and avenues. But what I'm concerned with, first of all, primarily, just as we sort of sit in this calm, quote unquote, before the storm, is that we don't get so caught up in becoming the audience to this potential conflict that we get swept up by it and we don't pay attention to other things. Simultaneously, that this aggression not be allowed to stand. I briefly contemplated incorporating some version of that meme from The Big Lebowski. This aggression shall not stand, man. Although it's obviously a different context, but in a different conflict, in a different chapter of American and world history. But I reel it back. I've been chattering away for 20 minutes since firing up the show, and some would argue I have not said very much. Perhaps. First of all, let me clarify for any new listeners. I don't do this podcast to pretend to be a news source. I'm here to discuss, analyze, and share with you my thoughts, concerns, and questions about the world events going on around us to the best of my ability to observe them, not to report them to you. If you don't know what's going on in the world, I'm sorry. This particular episode may be so vague as to be obtuse. But turn on your TV, and like I said, go tune into this is now just 5 hours ago, the Ukrainian foreign minister's speech asking the United Nations General Assembly for help in its defense of itself and its sovereignty and its democratic freedoms and its borders against this very subtle, quiet, slow trickle of an incursion / invasion being quite humorously referred to by the Russians as a peacekeeping mission into the hitherto already turbulently being fought over what's that term for contested territories along eastern Ukraine. Catch yourself up, and also I'm going to drop this DJ Zed track, and then we're going to get into some deeper thoughts about the bigger picture. DJ Zed. Dear audience, I humbly invite you to head on over to soundcloud.com/Mr. Zeppo. Check out the newest and the oldest of the goldies. From the earliest of early days of the animatronic DJ Zed's experimentation with Discotheque Synthetica, to the hottest, freshest, newest, dopest track that he's just animatronically generated for your audio entertainment. Hot off the transdimensional presses. Please go do check it out. And while you're at it, visit the other many interesting varied dimensions of the Zeppoverse and support these imaginary struggling content creators that you lovingly know as DJ Zed and Mr. Zeppo by visiting solo.to/Mr. Zeppo. Okay, so the world is sitting on the edge of its seat right now and sort of bickering. I don't know about you guys, but commenting as I am from way over here on the front lines of the liminal boundary between Trumptopia and the North American nation state formerly recognized as the US of A. It's quite disheartening and sad, but almost par for the course, not surprising, as it is generally to be expected in the Trumptopian culture of everything is shit post and trolling jibber jabber and nothing matters. There's conflict and infighting amongst the right wing of the duopoly echo chamber political system here, as some prominent bobbleheads focus on bashing Grandpa Joe as hard as possible for, I guess, apparently looking weak in the face of Putin's weird, slow motion, smarmy, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, not an invasion, oh wait, I'm taking over as much of this country as possible kind of maneuvers that seem to be playing out. Of course, I'm not there. I'm not a journalist. I'm not a reporter. I'm just here sharing with you, dear audience and enthusiasts, my philosophical perspective on what's going on. There's a lot of back and forth in general, right? And some people, both back in the USSR, and I swear, if I was on the real radio station right there, I'd right over here, imaginary setup. There's a fucking old or maybe new school floating turntable, but on it is the sexiest old school original mint condition vinyl pressing of whatever album. Forgive me for not being a nerdy enough Beatles fan to know off the top of my head. Is it Rubber Soul? I don't know. But back in the USSR, and I just drop it right there to rock out to for a hot second, and then pick it back up so we can continue our discussion. But at the global scale, one of the things that's literally going on, if you take a big step back and set aside whatever assumptions and presumptions and biases you generally cling to, and you scan across everything with a cold, non-partisan, non-biased as possible attitude, you'll note that there's a curious pattern. And it's the same effing pattern I'm constantly, blue in the face about calling out here along the orange curtain of hypocrisy. The orange wall of Trumptopian hypocrisy. I don't literally live right up close to the what is it, mile and a half worth of Trumptopian wall that got built up in the great golden state of SoCal. But I can pretend to at an international level because I'm way closer to it than most people probably listening to the show. But I got homies down in SD. What's up, San Diego? Keep it classy. Both sides, and not in a totalitarian, monolithic kind of way. Obviously, who do you think you're listening to, right? But there is already a pinup on the corkboard about no human endeavor being a monolith of any given quality. So check in with that cluster of ideas and discussion. But there is a pattern, right? Okay, what's the big stink here in the States? You got a two-party system, foaming at the mouth to politically fight each other with fringe elements that in different times and epochs as the mood swings are willing to flirt with American on American violence. There's a bit of a racial divide there that seems to be generally part of the pattern, but there's also a big effort on the right wing to sort of go, no, it's not about that at all, even though they're the ones kind of most surrounding themselves with the people that are intolerant to minority, ethnic, racial diversity. But here's the key ingredient I'm trying to get at, because those ingredients are very America, and I don't know if they correlate to Ukraine and Russia, and I know that Ukraine and Russia are two different countries right now. It's Mr. Putin and his whoever his blind faith enthusiast sycophant followers and believers might say otherwise, but in the States, both parties go to great lengths to accuse the other side of being wholly, completely, and absolutely morally wrong, inferior, corrupt, etc., etc., etc. Both sides. And in different ways, and in different, coming at it from different angles. And the catch-22 of it is, they get enough people in their own base, on their own side, to take it for granted that is God's honest truth. The empirical, measurable, verifiable fact of the matter is, my party is righteous and true. Those other guys over there, corrupt as fuck, and ever increasingly worthy of me thinking I should take up arms against them in violence. The other guys are always the ones committing the atrocities. Now, there's a part of me that is exhausted by how obvious the us versus them toxic conditioning is being exemplified in both cases, in both examples here, and just generally throughout society at a global scale. And some people out there are, like me, exhausted of seeing it, exhausted of being told about it, exhausted of pointing it out to others, exhausted of being aware that, yes, in fact, most folks pick a camp to cling to and then buy right into this us versus them dialectic, this dogmatic indoctrination into some ideological expression of we are righteous and true, they are absolute evil and worthy of increasingly considering taking up arms against in violence. It's not, scripted specifically like that, but that's my wording. But don't believe me? Trust me, in the last 48 hours, if you look through social media and mainstream media and the various platforms in between those two extremes, there are claims that the West et al., hyperbolically exaggerating, fear-mongering, and or are the ones that are persecuting Russia and, pushing them so that their back's up against the wall and they gotta do what they gotta do. And vice versa. There's claims that one side is bombing the other and that the other side is faking it, and vice versa. And I'm sure if money were no obstacle and I could guarantee my own safety and security, and I could just pack whatever gear I needed to go and verify it, I could find out what's the truth, what's not the truth, what's misconception, what's misinformation, etc., etc., etc. Until the audience of the show grows large enough that I'm raking in the internet work from home kind of money that I can become a job creator and hire the staff that would be required to pull off such an endeavor, I'm not going to bullshit you and tell you that I know, right? But I'm going to be really crystal clear and tell you that I'm not capable of knowing, of going out into the world and confirming. I am capable of scanning as many sources of information as are actually available to me and trying my best to discern and determine for myself through critical thought and logical reasoning what is most likely the case. And given the scale of development over the last 3 days, and my nature being that I think in probability waveform functions, I think that we really truly are on the doorstep to what could be the event that finally gets officially labeled World War III, especially as the conflicts, the ongoing, seemingly endless conflicts that have not been hitherto worthy of that title, nevertheless involve multiple countries and have been going on for way too long, in Yemen and various other countries, rages on and may pick up steam and sort of momentum towards overflowing out into some larger world stage. In the face of such a moment, I'm forced to contend with the reality that I talk about this podcast explicitly being an examination or an exploration of the radical intersection of technology, pop culture, politics, society, and spirituality in an unorthodox fashion with digital animatronic robot dance music known commonly as discotheque synthetica. So where does the spirituality angle come in, folks? That's next after this particular audio entertainment robot dance synthetica audio track entitled Dreamscapes Undulate Till Dawn. That last one, just in case I totally brain farted and failed to share with you its lovely, sometimes alliterative title, although I don't remember if this one is or not. That last track we listened to, Pre-Mod Mix Take 1, Netherworld Nights, DJ Zed, mixing for you on the Remix Live, a Jack and House audio entertainment track. That was the last one. And this next one, Dreamscapes, Undulating Till Dawn. DJ Zed with that Discotheque Synthetica. Teasing it out because I humbly invite you to check out the newest, freshest tracks over on SoundCloud.com/Mr. Zeppo. And be sure to vote for your favorite tracks. Read the little blurb, get involved, engage, drop comments, hit that follow button, smash the hearts, etc., etc., etc. Please help DJ Zed and I find our electronic dance music audience here on planet Dirt, as I think that's the closest music genre to what this actually is. You know, coming from a dimension where robots evolved before mammals. I know that sounds highly improbable, almost science fiction-y, right? It's because it is, friends. Wah, wah. Head on over to solo.to/Mr. Zeppo, where you can find the Wattpad link to read the slowly developing adventures of... That's me taking the piss on myself. The slowly developing adventures of Mr. Zeppo and DJ Zed as literary characters. They are artificial life forms from two neighboring robot dimensions that were sent here to your dimension on this planet Dirt to, try to grab your attention and steer you clear of some of the errors that your neighbors in parallel probability waveform function timelines have committed. But I digress. That's literary fiction, and we're talking about the real world events of what may be and what has been fear-mongered and saber-rattled to death in recent days and weeks. As the largest land conflict in Europe since World War I and II. So where is the spiritual nexus on this? What kind of hippie new age pacifist doodads am I going to throw down? Well, friends, it's rough. It's rough, right? Because intellectually speaking, I support the Ukrainian people in defending themselves. I also get the complex chaos that is the Donbass region, the two states. Oh man, that was one of the things I was supposed to type up before we came back. And I'll have a map in front of me. But do we have one with the images? Anyways, I'm trying to get at the names of the separatists' regions. Spiritually, this matters on many levels, dear friends, and let's not pretend it doesn't. Because I am someone who stands in solidarity with, and I meant to find this gentleman's name. I know I've got multiple instances of this meme in my phone device, but one of the last surviving veterans from either World War I or World War II is quoted as calling out in there's a couple of different quotes that I like from probably a couple of different of the last surviving veterans, but there's one that explicitly calls out war as nothing more than organized murder for profit. Now, when tanks are rolling into a sovereign nation's, territories that have been infiltrated by, this phrase has been thrown around since, what was it, 2018 or 2014? Whenever Russia illegally annexed Crimea, but Russian-backed separatists it's I'm never going to find the name of those states, and that's just going to keep distracting me from trying to find my flow, folks. So let me be clear, because I'm a person of nuance, right? And nothing is an absolute monolith of anything, and so no one's opinions are, and no one's opinions should be, absolute monoliths of nothing. War is a tragic thing, even in its most purest form, for lack of a better term. And it's, if we were to imagine the least compromised, least corrupted, least burdened with the guilt of being an exercise for profit, as opposed to a truly unavoidable conflict regarding an otherwise intractable and unsolvable problem. There's a lot of talk, and there's a lot of analysis, and there's a lot of attribution of rationale, and there's a lot of talking about questioning of whether or not, a lot of people have been throwing around the question, is he a rational actor? Is he balanced, etc.? But one thing that is clearly being displayed from what I've been able to perceive for myself, setting aside all the commentary, right? Because that's not where I'm getting my ideas or where I'm trying to lay my questions. But just observing what I've been able to observe, and acknowledging that I only speak two languages, so it's not like I was listening in their native tongues, but the president of Russia clearly has an ideological construct in his mind that projects out into the world a series of egregious and intolerable conditions that must be rectified by him. And I wouldn't be surprised if at some point he's said, in the same way that Donald Trump said, I alone can fix it. Something to that effect. How do you deal with that? I've seen firsthand and heard anecdotally that the cynics in the world will throw this kind of situation in a spiritualist's face and say, what are you going to do? Pray until the invasion ends? I mean, many people are. In fact, there are reports of vigils and prayer sessions. And I got to stop and say, obviously not being able to go and visit for myself and see the conditions on the ground, from the best of, the broad spectrum of sources that I've been sampling the reporting from, kudos to the people of Ukraine. Because they seem to have the kind of attitude that is lacking elsewhere. They're like, They're not panicking. They're not freaking out, or at least they seem not to have been. They're putting on that stiff upper lip, and they went out of their way to express themselves peacefully in as things escalated in the last few days, and made it clear that as far as they were concerned, peaceful negotiations and diplomacy should win the day, and that they were not interested in kinetic, violent actions. Now, of course, there's the sort of overlooked reality that these contested territories in the Donbass area, the states of which I never did confirm the names of, Luhansk and something that almost rhymes. Damn it. That's been a sort of slow simmer, never quite get into full-blown raging, boiling war of a war that's been going on for 8 years, right? So, like, I could have, and I should have actually, found a way to work in and utilize my that sarcastic, that dripping with sarcasm statement from earlier. Meanwhile, in the contested states, the rationale that is being displayed is that both parties seem to be I'm trying to pick my wording very carefully here because I don't, I'm not pretending to be a journalist, so I also don't want to be accused of making accusations or spreading disinformation. But I've seen reports that in recent months and weeks, and especially in recent days, the ceasefire that has been supposedly in effect, that has been arguably in effect since whenever it went into effect, presumably attached to the Minsk, I can't pronounce these words, Minsk Accords, or am I crossing over into MCU territory? The peace treaty about this particular whole issue here in Ukraine. It's that what's gotten me all worked up is that is this little detail, right? That if we go over and were to just spend a day watching Russian news on Russian TV, we'd probably come very close to conceding that, well, it's not impossible to believe, mind you, my wording, it's not impossible to believe, based on the way that this is being presented, that Ukraine is the aggressor, right? Conversely, to hear Ukraine tell it, clearly they're not. And what I'm trying to drive at is that in the public discourse surrounding this, until it becomes clear and obvious, and or actions become so egregious that the villain is no longer so easily conflated with the victim, the debate will rage on. And that is a dangerous thing in and of itself that's getting normalized because it's part of the playbook. And it's not just part of the playbook for Russia's, whatever Russia's grand design may be, to reassemble like Humpty Dumpty the lost territories of the great empire to whatever level they aspire to regain them all. And let's put a pin in that, because that in and of itself is a kind of crazy cuckoo level of dangerous school of thinking to apply at a nation state place. I mean, wouldn't you agree? I mean, I'm sure most Americans would freak out and unite in solidarity against Great Britain suddenly going, I think I'd like to declare this chunk and this chunk of the east coast of the United States of America independent, sovereign nation states of a United Kingdom designation. Make them part of the United Kingdom and maybe liberate them from American tyranny. Right? Or Canada. Going after some, part of the land they lost. Which treaty was that where they got screwed? Was it the Louisiana Purchase? Or Mexico? Coming after California, Oregon, Texas, and the various other bits that used to all be Mexico. Or to bring it full circle, Mongolia, right? Trying to just start chipping away at, because most of Russia belonged to Mongolia at one point. Now there's a rational place where rational people can come to terms. And that's probably the best wording to use, as opposed to anything else which may be misleading. But rational people rationally working together to come to rational terms. But okay, I said, well, how does this all interconnect with spirituality? And I've been sort of stringing you all along. Well, consider the following, dear audience and internet fam. As things stand, here and now, right, in the observable, mundane version of this history that we're living through, we don't have a broad, inclusive, global, transcendental, spiritual interconnectedness and mutual understanding, do we? No. Now, I know this is what if-y, or, about asking a big what if statement, but I ask it in all seriousness. What if we did, or had? What if from World War I on, the Western world, or let's say World War II, let's be fair, and say we didn't learn our lesson in World War I, and then we started everything up in World War II all over again. But let's imagine, and yes, I know this is revisionist history, an issue that's very much being heatedly contested and argued about here in these grand old states of, united Trumptopia, because America has a big thorn in its butthole about dealing with its own complicated, effed up history. But that's a pin on the corkboard. And let's come back to do this thought experiment. Imagine if after World War II, we hadn't taken such a polite yet still very patriarchal and slightly tyrannically, what's the word I'm looking for? Empire-oriented, as in we were still thinking like empires. What if we'd taken a more holistic approach and integrated some deep lessons from the Far East, borrowing from their spirituality. Some would raise their hands in class and say, but we did. In fact, the end of the war and the return of soldiers from all nations that had been in the Far East and had been in the Mid East and been in the Sub-Saharan, they brought back esoteric things, and which eventually planted seeds towards a popular movement of saying, hey, you guys, we need to import these ideas and incorporate them. But let's just say, for argument's sake, because most of the taciturn historical revisionism that goes on is down. People are historically revising down towards a worse outcome, a worse new reality now. I'm trying to historically revise up in a utopian way, right? To try to live up to that meme about how the world needs more utopian, aspirational fiction as opposed to dystopian, dismal fiction. But as a matter of a thought experiment, what if there had been some consciousness, some movement that was a bigger, broader, more mainstreamified part of the world's processing and recovering from that deeply traumatic series of events that was World War I and World War II, right? To the extent that over the last however many decades it's been, from whenever you want to start measuring, we're talking about 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, 80 years, but in the last, let's just pin it at 60, in the last 60 plus years, everyone might have been able to have been more spiritually engaged in their own healing work, in their own reintegration, in their own addressing of the dark trauma that we have been neglecting for so long, is arguably the root cause of all the corruption and ego-driven psychosis that leads to the very crazy precipice of conflict that we're staring down. To put it more succinctly, imagine a world in which the tyrant we see now trying to steal back yet another chunk of a country he feels belongs to him. Imagine that tyrant had grown up doing yoga and meditation and past life regression work and whatever the fuck else that might have been. Past life regression work may have been a little bit cuckoo sounding for some folks. But there's a little bit of a there, I personally think. Especially if you leave the door open to we've always been each other, and once you go aha through that sort of process, you really gain a deep, sympathetic, empathetic, unconditional love towards all others. Let's put it even more succinctly. Imagine a world in which the leaders of all countries lived with a deeper, more meaningful, more tangible, more visceral, and undeniable personal understanding of our interconnectedness, of our spiritual unity, of our undeniable mutual co-creative divinity, right? What's that one meme? I think I referenced it in an episode recently, and I'm going to reference it again. It's somebody made a brilliant Rick and Morty meme recently that's not directly related to any of the world events that I'm addressing here in today's episode, and yet it is. But it's Rick in that 2 panel where he like is reaching over and explaining something and then ripping the wallpaper off to reveal the answer or the punchline or the payoff, which is in this particular version of that template, that Jesus understood we are each other. We have always been one another. That's why he loved everyone unconditionally. He got it. He understood it. That's why he didn't judge the leper and the tax collector and the soldier and the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Imagine a world where those who would be tyrants otherwise, from birth, were raised in a society that invested deeply in that kind of spiritual healing, that kind of spiritual authenticity, that kind of spiritual understanding, that kind of spiritual integration of these elusive but very real, very tangible, very phenomenological spiritual wisdoms about the truly divine nature of the human species, the human family. I mean, it's almost, it borders on almost inconceivable of what alternative set of conditions we would be discussing had that been the case, right? And so I say to you, that is the wisdom in the ancient adage, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. The cynics and the haters are right? Whenever they spit that line of that really shallow, silly, petty, dismissive line, that they sometimes pat themselves on the back and applaud themselves as if it were some sort of game-winning slam dunk worth a bunch of extra points in saying, what are you going to do? Hug your enemy to death? You're going to love your enemy into compliance? You know, there's many variants of it, but basically saying, what are you going to do, hippie? Well, I mean, if I could travel back in time, 80 years ago, I would have planted the seeds necessary to have prevented this. But since we can't go back in time to plant the seeds and drop the knowledge and the wisdom and the instruction and the guidance and the suggestion, the quote unquote leading the horse to water, the quote unquote pointing to the door that only you can walk through, way back before that last round of existential self-mutilation and trauma causing political upheaval, right? Because what else is it? It's easy to get lost, get caught up in the dare I call it judgment of war, right? Like it's easy to be sort of an armchair pacifist and just be like, war is bad, right? Of course it is. I get it. There is there's a great meme going around about how under the brightest, how I always forget the wording of memes, and then of course I never think about them until the context evokes their memory, and then I don't have them immediately in front of me. But somebody I'm social media acquaintances with posted a meme that I'm going to deeply butcher in paraphrasing by saying that force is most justified in self-defense and not in the pursuit of the gaining of power. It was a much longer, much more nuanced quote than that. But imagine a world in which we've healed the trauma that leads to the corruption, that leads to the ego addictions, that lead to the greed and the hunger for more power that generates the mechanisms, the rationalizations and mechanisms of war. And somebody else pointed out in living memory, if we just start teaching all the children meditation and yoga now, in a generation and a half, we will have eliminated war. It sounds easy to dismiss. It sounds really embarrassingly easy to dismiss. But who's doing the disservice when one chooses to dismiss such a thing, right? Who's being the useful fool? The pacifist that wants to rally the people, because it is ultimately we, the people, that have the cumulative power to either vilify ourselves and each other to the point of no longer being able to tell who is the villain and who is the victim, which is, I think, the sort of psychotic path that some folks in one quadrant of the ideological tribal warfare spectrum of ideological tribal warfareisms is trying to push us down, because I think they quite seriously think there might be some new next level of profitability there if we can really get it to some sort of Oceania versus whatever the fuck. What's that trifecta of countries from the one of the two books that everyone loves to Bible thump right now? But yeah, like, there's so many layers of chaos. But I've been rambling long enough. We'll have to come back to this and visit. But let's put a few pins on the board, folks. Why is one big, huge chunk of the right wing of the duopoly echo chamber of the American two-party system cheering on this slow creep incursion that's about to become a full-on invasion that may erupt quite quickly into full-blown largest land war in Europe since World War II? Like, why? Like, how, where in any way, shape, or form does it make sense for bobbleheads like Tucky Tuckums to be cheering on this, and or sort of finding humorously blasé and casual ways to dismiss it as if it don't matter, right? Like, there's this huge undertow of folks. If you go to the, like, random individuals on the streets sort of interview footage, that I'm sure they're going to be churning out as this escalates to whatever place it escalates to before plateauing, as that's where I fear it's going to go. There's a lot of speculation about what tactics, right? And I don't even want to get into it because it's a mess. But there's an easy sort of vise grip pincer maneuver to, like, chomp off, and or sort of like a Pac-Man sort of shape that you could carve out, especially if you go all the way to the land bridge idea to connect the previously illegally acquired chunk known as Crimea to the rest of it. And of course, there's the worst case scenario that, the Russian armies might just try to take the whole effing kit and caboodle in one fell swoop. Wherever it's going to escalate to and plateau, it's going to be a god-awful fucking clusterfuck of crazy for a hot minute. Okay? And a certain portion of the Trumpopian inception camp of the GOP, right? Because that's sort of what happened. Trump created the Trumpopian inception, the ideological inception of Trumpopian constructs into the otherwise already sort of ridiculously deranged right-wing GOP. It'll never get old for me, the sad, tragic irony that he was literally a lifelong Democrat for God knows how long, until he just sort of went, I think I'll swap parties and start, lobbing weird, bizarre favors at Vladimir Putin. But I had plenty to say about all of that in real time, folks. For those of you who are new, please do yourself a favor, scroll on down and find those episodes. Do I have references? No, I don't remember. But I know for a fact that somewhere deep in the deep down in the list, in the episodes that would make sense in the time frames, I must have at some point or another dropped a few thinky thought rambly sidebars about Russiagate, about Russian collusion, and about Trump's weird, bizarre tendency to act like a sycophant. We can go off for a whole other hour or two about that whole weird dichotomous aspect, right? Because, in Trumptopia, Trump is a sycophant to no one. He's the one demanding personal loyalty. It's only until you open up the context broad enough to include tyrants from abroad that you suddenly see Trump engage in the behavior of sycophancy in service to others. And there's got to be something to that. We asked questions. There's that, I don't remember if y'all saw it, but I made a meme about body language. Like, what on earth could this body language meme? Wow, I hate it when the word meme and the word mean are too close together in a sentence, and my brain just short circuits, and then I mess them both up, which is exactly what happened there. But I digress. Mary Trump reposted her own commentary about that particular image, because that image will haunt Trump and will be part of the historical analysis of it, as all of this stuff conflates. And I'll want to round this out. Plant seeds for a Good Morning Trumptopia episode in the not too distant future. But it's ridiculous to me that Donald Trump had the audacity to, in the same conversation, the same answer, basically in the same breath, praise these developing maneuvers into, the bogus contested territories, because they're only contested in as much as that Russia has been funding these Russian-backed separatists ever since, test marketing the series of maneuvers in Crimea. But just, was it this morning or yesterday morning? It's all, the time, this particular epoch in history is so intense that the last 36 hours is all kind of one contiguous blur. 36 to 48 hours is going to be, I think the pace of everything's going to change in about another day or so, and then we'll see where things go. But either this morning or yesterday morning, Donald Trump on somebody's podcast had the audacity to, in the same breath, lavish praise like absurd, over the top level, sycophancy, like yes man, I'm just gonna gobble things down until my nose is really brown kind of praise, and then also boast quite absurdly that this would never have happened if he had still been in office. Despite the plain, hardcore reality that plenty of the shenanigans he got into while in office directly facilitated, although maybe not in the front limelight of anybody's awareness, the current incursion. Or has everyone forgotten that one time when Donald Trump withheld material military aid from Ukraine because of what now? Because of the issue of the Donbass region with the two different states. What do they call them? They're not counties. It's a cool, weird word, and I need to look it up and lock it in. And forgive me, people of Ukraine, for not having the name of your two states that are currently partially occupied and maybe fully invaded in the coming 48 hours. I should have by now. Everyone's been talking about it for the last week and a half. Lugansk and something else that ends with angst, that starts with a D. I'm an ass. I'm a woefully understaffed amateur, and not a professional journalist ever, never claimed to be. So, it's just ridiculous what he did, Donald Trump. Never mind. It's also ridiculous what Russia is doing. But that he did so, and that whatever remaining, although ever so slowly wearing away, portion of the base that he still retains, Trump, I mean, continues to not be able to go, oh, wow, yeah, that's too many dots that add up in terms of the severely inappropriate bromance between these two world leaders. But I'm fairly certain, and of course it's purely meaningless speculation here, which I say for the purposes of satire and comedy at this point. But if Donald Trump had somehow magically and mysteriously retained his seat in office, and I don't even want to get into some of the nonsensical beliefs that people still cling to, although it should be pretty clear by now that it's been pure nonsense. But if he were somehow magically the person sitting in the president, the office of president now, I think it would be safe to say that he would be bending over backwards to bash NATO, diss the UN, and do as many ridiculously silly yet somehow mysteriously helpful things and of course, effusively, lavishly praising and fanboying, gushing all over this. But who knows, right? What we have the opportunity to do, friends, first of all, let's take a quick moment to not let it go unsaid or unrecognized. The massive and overwhelming amount of gratitude that we are not living through this with an active, legitimate, nuclear code empowered Trump administration. Thank God. Knock on some fucking wood and cherish the gratitude that he is not in office and that he's not really secretly actually controlling things behind the scenes and just letting for reasons that make zero coherent sense, Biden do whatever he wants. Not that I'm a blind faith Biden defender, because I'm not, although lots of people love to irrationally accuse me of being. My record stands clean of that nonsense. I'm truly and genuinely relieved and full of gratitude that it is anyone other than Trump sitting in the White House right now as these events unfold. And back to what I was trying to end the show on, let's not overlook the opportunity at hand, friends. From an esoteric, spiritual, mystic point of view, this is the 20, 30 years ago of the future. Right now, as these events unfold, as we live through what some are describing as what might potentially be the largest land war in Europe since World War II, therefore potentially worthy of truly becoming World War III, let us do the work. And I say this to those who don't need convincing that there are spiritual tools at our disposal. Although I welcome those who are open to being convinced to join us. If there was ever a time to double down on meditation, to quadruple down on spiritual practices, at the inner, both inner and singular, and outer and collective, and all the ways you could vary those, because whenever you identify two ends of a spectrum, you've got the variance in between. And try to, as a, rally the spiritual collective, right? Politically speaking, in America, Trump loved to invoke this ridiculous notion of the silent majority. And I do not think that people who think like Trump even remotely approach a majority. But it's their belief as a base themselves that they do that keeps them hook, line, and sinkered into Trump's line of malarkey. I do realize I could be wrong. As always, dear friends, I say to you humbly. I don't know, I called you humble friends, but you probably are. But that wasn't the way I was trying to construct that sentence at first. And now I've completely lost track of where I was going. But hopefully it still makes sense to your minds, whatever I was saying. Keep extending that thought. Our opportunity, dear spiritual friends, is to gather now in support of all those that must be warriors in the face of an unfair and arguably immoral aggression. The rest of us who are not warriors, who are not burdened with that responsibility, I think we must rally to unite across all borders and invoke the manifestation of the quickest, most pain-free return to peace as possible. Real peace. And the thoughtful and mindful implementation of better holistic coping mechanisms as we recover from whatever levels of crazy this may or may not, keeping the fingers crossed, reach, right? Are you with me, folks? Am I making sense? If I'm not making sense, That's cool. Help me to make more sense. If I am making sense, rock on. Help me to share that message to more people so that more people can be like, yeah, that makes sense. Because ultimately, it is a numbers game, right? Just like warfare could arguably be determined by sheer volume. If you overwhelm the opposition, your odds of just hands down victory, exponentially grow. Well, those who are caught in the loop of the system of oppression, normalizing conflict and war as sort of an unavoidable and sometimes necessary evil. They don't want anyone like you or I to rally to this other cause of healing, of transcendent healing. But it's there for us as a possibility, as an alternative to some new grotesque level of normalizing what can only be described as organized murder for somebody's profit. But I will digress and relinquish my soapbox, dear friends, for I feel like I'm starting to beat the drum a bit too redundantly. The calling is out there, though. It goes out there, and I hope that we will rally together across communities, across identities, across political parties, across, nation-state boundaries. This is a call for deep, genuine, authentic, spiritual healing work to commence or to be doubled down on. Presumably, plenty of people are already out there doing the work. Triple down on, quadruple down on the work. And also, part of that work is clarifying that we're really truly doing legitimate work that is contributing towards the individual and collective healing of the root spiritual trauma that is the real cause of all of the earthly effects that we see and have been unfortunately spending too much time arguing about and not solving. As always, friends, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm going to wrap this episode up with a little bit more of that animatronic digital robot dance music discotheque synthetica for your listening pleasure, and then we'll have maybe a little bit of a kicker and, of course, the outro music. Here's a little bit of When Robots Invented Dance, a Tech House Volume 2, live to tape, no post-production edits, remix live performance by yours truly and DJ Zed, the transdimensionally animatronic DJ. Okay, press play. I fumbled that intro. Sorry, DJ Zed. I wonder what's up with that trucker convoy. Maybe something to look into for tomorrow's Good Morning Trumptopia episode. But, you know, there was all this hoopla about the truckers, these sort of the American truckers, mimicking or paralleling the protests from up in Canada. And they were gonna supposedly ruin the Super Bowl. And I don't know, I wasn't there. I wasn't in town. I wasn't near the stadium, but I didn't catch any news coming out of all the coverage of the game that any trucker protest action even happened. I'll have to see. We'll have to look, put a pin in that for an upcoming episode. But as of right now, what I'm curious about, I have two big questions that just popped up in my head while that last track was playing. And that's, I wonder if the trucker convoy, which is either already driving across the country, because they're going to Washington, right? If they're annoyed that all this shenanigans and international crisis in Europe is detracting from their news coverage here in the States, because even Fox News, from my scanning across all the different channels, hasn't really been talking about them as much. I'm sure they've mentioned them. The one thing you can never say about any media outlet is that they have never mentioned a thing, because they have, and someone will find it, and you'll look like an idiot, right? I shouldn't have said the word idiot. I should have said like a fool. It's just less harsh, because we can all be fools, yo, and we can all be idiots. Let's just be honest. But I digress. The other question I have about the truckers is, and this is an unfair question, but I wonder who they'd be behind. Like, if we surveyed all the truckers in this trucker convoy that's going to protest rally in Washington for freedom, what percentage of them are also unironically rooting for the Russian invasion of Ukraine? I don't know. I have a sneaky suspicion that some unusually high percentage of them just may very well be. But maybe they're not. Maybe they're just like, hey, why don't we have more news coverage? Because they're definitely getting pushed down below the fold, as we used to say back when it was mostly all paper media. But that's also just nonsensical comedy right there. Friends, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening to this humble episode. And as always, thank you for your support.
And that is the latest breaking news. We now return you to your regularly scheduled brainwashing. Thank you for listening.